Hey guys, Ron here, and after playing Pokemon for like 20 years, I'm down for a few new mechanics or stats to spice up Pokemon battles. Ones that feel intuitive and make battles a bit more strategic. I mean, Pokemon battles changed forever for me once I figured out that stats actually did something. So why not make more stats? I know 6 stats seem like enough, but how about we get our imagination juices flowing and come up with some hypothetical stats that Game Freak can implement? Keep in mind, I'm fully aware that Pokemon stats are already very well balanced, and adding 1 or 2 new ones would throw the whole metagame out of whack. So even though I'm proposing like 10 new Pokemon stats, I'm not saying all of them should be implemented at the same exact time, just that they're all good candidates. But to judge how competitively viable and balanced these new stats could be, I asked Joey, aka pokeaimMD, to join us.
Thanks for having me, and please, give us some polite feedback in the comments section. For example, some of these stat names aren't perfect, and perhaps you have a more creative way of developing these stats and how they work.
Exactly, this is all for fun, and hopefully you can tell our voices apart. Now let's begin with permanent stats that we can add to the existing 6. Ones that grow with experience and levels and are determined by a Pokemon's physiology. The first one that comes to mind is already kind of similar to existing stats: Endurance. What if Pokemon had a stat that determines how well a Pokemon resists non-move related damage, like weather, status effects, and entry hazards? In traditional RPGs, endurance is basically just like HP or defense, but to make it even more interesting, Pokemon like Toxapex could have high defense but low endurance, but a Pokemon like Dugtrio can have low defense but high endurance, making Hail slightly less effective on it. My own personal critique is that it's a little too hard to differentiate between endurance and plain old HP and defense.
Well, while I get your concern, HP and defense really have nothing to do with toxic damage, for instance, so endurance is actually very useful. This can actually allow us to pull similar effects to abilities like Heat Proof, for instance, that weakens burn damage. I mean, we could even have status conditions that increase endurance that have status damage. To be honest, it's a really tame and balanced stat.
Okay, great. I mean, I did want to start off with something a little bit more agreeable and then end up at the, wild stats. So let's make our way down the list and talk about 2 very similar new stats that could be counterparts. Like attack and defense, I guess. These are Charisma and Might. Charisma determines how well your Pokemon's stat increasing moves will do, and Might determines how well your Pokemon's stat decreasing moves will do. Basically, a Pokemon like Gardevoir, Sawsbuck, or Lycanroc may be very charming or majestic to behold, so their Charisma stat will boost the effects of moves like Swords Dance and Cosmic Power, while Pokemon with high Might stats are more intimidating like Grimmsnarl, Braviary, and Wailord, and therefore get a boost in moves that lower stats like Noble Roar and Leer.
While I do like the concept, the problem is that there are already moves that decrease the opponent's stats that are based on Charisma. We have Charm and Captivate, but you're attributing that to a Pokemon with high Might, like scary Pokemon who wouldn't really be charming. And vice versa, you have moves that increase stats like Bulk Up and Rage that would showcase a Pokemon's Might. So how about simply combining both of those into one Charisma stat that affects how strong a Pokemon's stat modifying moves are? This will make things way more realistic, like increasing the power of moves like Growl and Howl as the Pokemon evolves and becomes more charismatic. It just makes sense that the Howl of a Lycanroc would be stronger than that of its pre-evolution Rockruff.
Okay, that makes a whole lot of sense.
I mean, if you think that's too complicated though, we could just make Charisma stats simply increase the rate of secondary effects, like the chance of Aurora Beam lowering the opponent's stats, or Focus Blast lowering their special defense. I'm acting like you're gonna hit Focus Blast anyway.
True, but I have another new stat in mind for that, actually. How about Intelligence? The smarter a Pokemon is, the higher rate of secondary effects.
I've always wanted to see an Intelligence stat, but I feel like it'd just be too busted. Already good Pokemon like Alakazam and Metagross would become broken.
Okay, so how about we limit this to non-contact moves? But honestly, even I can understand that Pokemon like Alakazam would still be overpowered.
Especially since Alakazam is already hard to switch into as it is. Imagine all of its moves having a higher chance of getting a special defense drop. And I mean all of its moves: Psychic, Focus Blast, and Shadow Ball.
Okay, so how about Intelligence simply amplifies the rate of critical hits?
I like this more so far, but I feel like it might still be broken since critical hits are essentially as strong as choice moves, unless the critical hit is simply 12.5% instead of the usual 4, but even that just seems like too much.
Fine, I think the most balanced option is to make Intelligence affect a Pokemon's resistance to status moves, since they're less likely to be tricked or more likely to dodge secondary effects.
This honestly seems like the safest one, but at the end of the day, this is just for a fun video anyway. It doesn't really matter if it's incredibly balanced.
Sure, but I do like making concepts that would be potentially realistic. I think my next idea is a bit more believable version of intelligence. What if there was an awareness stat? This stat is basically related to how well a Pokemon can see in its environment. So Pokemon with good vision or sensory perception, like Talonflame or Mawile, can have high awareness. This stat could also potentially be called perception. But what does that stat actually do? Well, in the scenario that this stat actually exists, weather affects lower accuracy. This allows Pokemon with higher awareness to be way more accurate in weather. It could also replace the possibility of having a separate evasion stat. How about Pokemon with higher awareness simply have a higher chance of evasion? Maybe even less damage from entry hazards.
I really love this entire concept a lot. It makes a lot of sense and even lets us repurpose the safety goggles for even more viability now that weather lowers accuracy. But it needs a limit unless you want the safety goggles as centralizing as heavy duty boots or leftovers in singles. Basically, I don't think the effects of this should be that drastic. Like Hustle, for instance. We can simply make Pokemon with more awareness have +1 or +2 maximum in evasion.
Now how about this one, Joey? Dexterity. Originally I thought this was an RPG stat that couldn't be utilized by animals like Pokemon, but what if Dexterity affects the rate of multi-strike moves? Pokemon like Surfetch'd and Samurott would be able to frequently use Fury Attack and Icicle Spear to their highest potential. But if this is a bit too niche, then they could also have a higher critical hit rate and gain stronger effects from items.
Yeah, Dexterity affecting the multi-strike move rate is good enough. I like it.
A similar stat is also just taking accuracy and making it permanent. Some Pokemon simply have better aim, like Inteleon and Toucannon.
I think this is pretty self-explanatory, but using the Mon's aesthetic as well to measure this could be cool, like Flygon being more accurate because it has goggles to see better.
That's not bad, but I have an even better new effect for accuracy. How accurate a Pokemon is in distance and elevation, which leads me to all the in-battle stats we came up with. In-battle stats only appear and can be modified during a battle, like evasion and accuracy, unlike permanent stats like attack and speed. The first in-battle stat I thought of was elevation. In the scenario that this stat was real, there would also be moves that increase and decrease elevation, kinda like Fly and Levitate technically already do. There will be 5 stages of elevation. Level 0 is the default, just Pokemon on the ground without any modification. Level 1 are Pokemon with increased elevation due to some kind of move that was previously used, like Earth Power or Surf created high ground or water for a Pokemon to stand or float on. This basically raises their evasion by 1. Level 2 are Pokemon who float slightly above the ground, but don't have the ability Levitate, like Gengar, Geodude, or Venomoth. Not only do they have +1 evasion, but they can also fully evade some ground-type moves like Earthquake, but are still affected by some ground-type moves that should really hit them, like Mudshot, because I don't know why a Pokemon who's slightly above the ground would evade Mudshot. Now level 3 are Pokemon with Levitate or the Flying type. Just like we already have in the game, they can't be hit by any ground-type moves, but now their evasion is still also +1. And finally, we have level 4 elevation, which are Pokemon during the semi-invulnerable, I can't say semi-invulnerable, but semi-invulnerable moves like Fly. I think this will all be balanced out by the fact that some moves now lower elevation. Like the elevation of a levitating Pokemon can now be lowered by a Rock Throw, which now makes them vulnerable to some ground-type moves, since they move down from level 3 to level 2.
Let's spice it up a bit and lower a Pokemon's elevation as their HP goes down as well.
But honestly, distance is another new stat I came up with that can work similarly. If elevation didn't exist, there could be multiple stages of distance instead. Basically, the distance between 2 Pokemon on the field can be affected by what move they just used. And then every move in the game has a range. So for example, Pokemon that are further away have a bit more evasion, but less accuracy. But now it makes me think, how do I make it so that physical attackers aren't entirely nerfed?
I don't really consider this a true nerf though, since moves like Close Combat and Knockoff will make them closer to their target and close the distance anyway. And we have moves like Ice Beam, which are mid to long range. If anything, most special attackers are about the mid-range, I'd say. Maybe have a level list, like with Elevation. Level 1, close range, which has normal accuracy. Mid-range, maybe slightly less, and long-range ones like Earthquake will finally have less than 100 accuracy. Sorry, ground types.
Now how about out-of-battle stats? Basically meters that affect your Pokemon in battle. These are very fun. Let me give you an example. What if Pokemon actually got hungry and now it affects how much energy they have to perform a move? So basically how much you fed them affects how much PP they have. So a Pokemon that is full has a +3 PP for all of its moves. A well-fed Pokemon has +2, a satisfied Pokemon has +1, a Pokemon that simply isn't hungry has just a normal amount of PP, but now a Pokemon that is hungry has -1 PP. A famished Pokemon has 2 less, and a starving Pokemon starts the battle off with -3 PP for all of its moves.
I think this is really good, and it can honestly affect more than just the PP values, maybe even accuracy. If I'm hungry, for instance, I'm probably not going to run my best in track, or play my best in basketball, or even do that great on a test. And I feel like a Pokemon should be the exact same way.
Now what about tameness? What if Pokemon with higher base stat totals are less tame when they are caught? The tamer a Pokemon is, the more crits it lands. The less tame, the more it misses.
I like this too. It kind of reminds me of the OG games and needing badges to train Pokemon. It could be based on level and friendship as well.
And finally, here are some mechanics that I think could work like stats, but aren't. Stamina. Now this could be mistaken for HP, but I simply can't think of any other name. Power could work, but it's a little too generic. This new mechanic is basically that moves get weaker the more you use them in succession. So each turn that you use Flamethrower in a row, it gets gradually weaker until by the 6th turn, it has 50% of its original power. That's the cap, but it will reset once you use a different move or switch out. And this isn't the case for like status moves, just for damaging ones.
I feel like this could tie in with hunger as well, since stamina equals energy. Regardless, I like this a lot because it adds an element where, let's say I want to sweep with Dragon Dance Gyarados, but I can't if I keep clicking Waterfall. It makes me think twice about clicking moves to sweep. It really adds that extra competitive element I like. Fighting games like Multiverses do this to stop spamming, and I'm really interested to see how this would affect competitive Pokemon, since you can't just sweep with your setup bond like you normally could.
Yeah, it's honestly my favorite stat that we came up with today. I'd happily accept it in a future game. But what if there was a mechanic that allowed you to just do nothing? How about an option called No Move, where your Pokemon doesn't use any move, but gains like 1/8 of their HP back? Honestly, that's kind of the most unbelievable mechanic today. So it could easily just be like an ability that a future Pokemon has in Generation 10. Perhaps a Pokemon that dominates in the future meta. But what about a Pokemon that used to dominate?
Well, if you want to see about a Pokemon that used to dominate, come check out the video I did with Ron on my channel about the rise and fall of Talonflame, how the king of the Gen 6 meta fell from grace.
And if you just came from Joey's channel, then check out some of my videos where I create my own Fakemon, with cool moves and abilities too. I have a wide variety of Pokemon content, so leave a like and subscribe if you wanna. Make sure to check the description for the music I used, the t-shirts I made for you guys, and my Patreon where you can get cool rewards like a discount on my merch and my Patreon Discord. I'll see you guys very soon.